If you're just getting into GA4, you're like, crap, I haven't done this. Can I do anything about it? The best time to set up would have been at the beginning, but the next best time is right now. So don't feel like you're like, oh, that ship has sailed. I can't go in and change things, because you can certainly constantly be making it better. There's no one gold standard of how to do things. There's certainly rules about GA4 that are important to follow, but what you track and what's important to you is going to be unique to you and your business and how you do things.
Welcome to the third season of the Simple and Smart SEO Show, the podcast dedicated to empathy-driven, brand-building SEO. I'm your host, Crystal Waddell. I leverage my obsession with user experience to help business owners just like you optimize your website with confidence. Thank you so much for being here. Let's jump into another great episode. So guys, we are in for a very special treat today. I love to go out and find the best at what they do, and today's guest is no exception. I've got Dana DiTomaso here with us to talk all things Google Analytics. And don't be scared. I was scared, but don't be scared. It's going to be a great conversation. So Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And yeah, don't be scared. It's just analytics. It's really not life or death. Like, we're not saving babies or launching rockets here. It's just marketing analytics.
All right. Deep breath, everybody. I have a small group where I teach entrepreneurs how to do SEO. But I think I know how people feel when they hear SEO or like search engine optimization. Because for me, I'm like, that's amazing. But it's like the same feeling I get when I hear GA4, Google Analytics.
In the early days, SEO was like this weird little nerd thing that you paid someone to do, and it was like not a big part of your marketing budget. And now entire marketing departments are built around the ideas of SEO and PPC as well. But certainly I think PPC's always had a bit more legitimacy because it was a natural extension of buying things like newspaper ads and billboard ads, so that people already understood that paradigm. But for SEO, it was more like, you want to do what? And we have to do what? I think because people couched it in this, we're going to sprinkle some SEO fairy dust on this, and it felt very like hacker bro type culture around it. I think there still is that part of it for sure, but I think it's definitely become a lot more grown up and professional. And I think partly that's why more women are entering this field, because it is grown up and professional. But also, I think it's because it's more accessible, just generally. It used to be a lot more technical than it is now. Content did not necessarily used to be the thing. You could slap the keyword in there 10 times and you'd ranked it up. You needed to make sure the site was accessible and speed and everything else. When I still do technical audits, even now, I've been doing technical audits for a really long time. There's still like some things that are screwed up, but the ways in which websites are screwed up, Google's a lot more forgiving now than they used to be. And so things that aren't necessarily technically perfect can still rank if other factors are at play, including good content, good link building, which traditionally, frankly, has been where women enter a marketing field. So that's where that intersection has come in. Yes.
So what do you mean there with women with link building? And
oh, yeah. So I would say because SEO has shifted from being strictly a bro tech SEO feeling, that women have been entering it accidentally almost. Being like, oh, I didn't want to work in SEO because it's just full of dudes, but now I guess I write content for the web, so I guess I'm doing SEO. And so then it's over time, it's okay, this is actually part of SEO. But certainly there was a time when you would talk to SEOs and they'd be like, oh, content SEO isn't a real thing. Oh, sure, you're not a real SEO unless you're doing technical SEO. Whatever you have to say to make yourself feel better.
The perspective of a business owner is different too. And like entrepreneurs, and that's my target is entrepreneurs.
Yeah. You want to hire a professional to do a professional job. And there didn't used to necessarily be enough professionals. Like, I remember when I first had my agency back in, before Kickpoint, like back in Hamilton, where I grew up, our competitive difference was that we answered the phone when you called us. That was the level of professionalism that was required. The bar was extremely low. And now I think it's, obviously a bit more than that, but there's certainly, just like actually being honest about results. There's a bar. Not a lot of agencies necessarily get past. But I think that as the industry grows, and legitimizes, so you remember Brighton SEO, the jokes about the alligator parties and whatnot, right? Besides those articles, I think that it is an industry that is going in the right direction and is trying to do the right things.
The easiest and most accessible information I feel is about technical stuff. And so when you first start in SEO, it's, oh, I've got broken links or whatever. Okay, yeah, that's important to fix. But then there's all this other list of technical. So it's, oh, then I'll just tell everybody what's wrong with their website. You know what I mean? And then you realize, oh gosh, that doesn't actually help their business necessarily. Like that growth that happens, it's almost embarrassing.
But I think too, part of it is like this paralyzation that people have where they're like, there's all these things we could do. I don't know what to do. So I'm not going to do any of them because I'm stuck here. And as someone who like I have ADHD, and certainly I'm very familiar with paralysis analysis for sure. It's an important part of my life, unfortunately. But I think part of it is like just going in there and doing stuff is really important. And it seems silly to say that, but I feel like people do a lot of analysis, but there's not necessarily a lot of execution because people are worried about doing things that will have negative impacts.
Yeah.
Because you hear about this one story where they're like, I changed this thing and then the whole site got de-indexed. You only hear about those stories because they're rare and people talk about them. It's not necessarily what happens on the day-to-day basis. Most of the time, you do some technical changes, things go up or down. You're like, okay, that didn't work or that did work. And sometimes the work is great. Like one time we fixed canonical tags on a client's website and within 2 weeks, their organic traffic had gone up by 50%. Great. Normally, we do not get that great of technical changes. That was pretty spectacular. Pretty much cemented us with the client for life. But I was honest with them. I was like, I have never seen recovery this good from making this kind of change before. And yeah, and it had an outsized impact. Normally, it's not like that. You make a bunch of changes and slowly things improve over time. And when you look year over year, you're like, oh yeah, great, things are going. But that kind of rocket ship growth just doesn't happen. And that's part of it too, is this work I'm doing actually meaningful? Could I just not do anything and things would still increase? Sometimes you feel like that too.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like getting to the top and realizing, oh gosh,
Yeah.
all of that, was it for what? I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Did I actually need to write all this blog post? I actually need to stay up till 2 a.m. figuring out this thing? No, probably not. But, or did you? And this
yeah,
is the thing. We'll never really know.
yeah.
We know that doing things helps more than not doing things, but that's all we got.
One thing I have come to learn, there's some things that I've heard to do that are like the right things, whether or not they're SEO specific or just think about user experience for using screen readers or whatever. There's certain things that you do that are the right thing, and eventually they do get rewarded in one way or the other. And I'm a big believer in that. If it's like common sense or it's the right thing, there will be a
Or if it's
benefit.
something like relatively new that you know isn't going to necessarily be an impact yet, but we're here and we're in here fixing stuff, so let's do it. So accessibility is a great example, right? We know that the Americans with Disabilities Act, we work with a lot of American clients, is a big deal. People can get sued if their sites aren't accessible, period. So it's important to do from just a, we don't want to pay these enormous fines perspective. But it's also important to do from a, it's just a nice thing to do perspective. And it's a nice thing to do from a, people want to engage with your website in the way in which they can engage with websites perspective. And so because it has those multiple positive impacts, it's a much easier thing to sell now. But normally when we're working with a client and like making them a new website or something, we're like, we're going to do this and this is why. And they may not get it, but it's already in here. We're just going to change this thing, and FYI. And then later on, a couple of years from now, we're like, oh, actually now this is part of the WCAG or whatever it might be. And so it's good that we did this and we don't need to go back and do it again. The client's, oh, really thinking about that ahead of time. So it's a matter of how you position it, where we're already in here doing this. We're just going to do this anyway because it's a nice thing to do. Or we're going to do this because we think in a couple of years this is going to be a thing and we should just take care of it at this point. Things like schema, for example. Maybe at the moment, FAQ schema, does that mean we're going to stop adding FAQ schema to our pages or remove it from our pages? No, because schema is good for a number of different reasons, not just Google ranking. And so by not having that super narrow focus on, Google says it's not a ranking factor, so I'm going to remove my FAQ schema. That is the wrong way to approach SEO. You can't just be chasing what Google says or doesn't say, because also they say things in a very limited, specific way because they don't want to obviously tell all the secrets. There's more to SEO than just doing things to make your site rank on Google.
I used to teach autistic students. And one thing I learned with them is that give one direction at a time. And even now, like when you're speaking the computer language and trying to translate or whatever, one thing at a time is so key. Otherwise it gets convoluted.
Yeah. It's like that for clients too. It's really, this is something too, if you're doing a technical audit or a content audit or anything else and talking to a client about it or your boss, if you go through and you're like, here's the 38 things that we found, they are just going to gloss right over and not do anything on it because it is way too much information. But instead, you got to present it as a staged, small, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this, and mark things with like urgency and timeframes. And yeah, it's more work to present your audit, but it also means it's more likely to happen. Because there's so many audits. I'm sure more audits don't get implemented than do get implemented because the default action is not to do anything. So if you're not presenting a compelling case for that default action of inertia, then it's just not going to happen. And you're like, well, this client didn't go for the thing. Yeah, because you could have presented it in a different way. Or sometimes clients just don't want to do things, which is fine. You know what? That's their prerogative. But certainly it's a lot easier to get stuff done if you're able to present it in a way that feels manageable and step by step, as opposed to, here's the 8,000 things. Now grab one out of the bucket and here we go. That's not how that works.
I feel so convicted right now because I was so proud of myself. I just sent a proposal yesterday to someone.
Mhm.
We'd had a great conversation, and I was like, this time we're speaking specific business objectives, but I didn't add in what you said about the timeframes.
Yeah.
Or I did put the urgency. I put it in order, like 1 to 5 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I'm just, as you're talking, I'm like, oh, I could have made that so much better.
They could still go for it though. And I think that the fact that you presented it as the steps, I think is really key. And that's something more than what we've seen in other audits. It's just, there's so many bad audits that I see that clients have sent us that other agencies have done. And they're just like exporting whatever it says in SEMrush or whatever.
Mhm.
It's so frustrating. It's like, why do I have so many ethics? If I had less ethics, audits are just like people getting money for no action. And it's also providing a disservice to the industry as a whole because they're like, I had an SEO audit once, it was crap. And that's
Mhm.
not representative of what you should get in
Yeah.
the industry.
Yeah. My dad is my biggest fan. And when I showed him all these things I was learning early on, he was like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, you should charge for this and this. And I'm like, Dad, you don't understand. Like that right there, everybody can do that. Like I just realized like everybody is doing that because you can just download it. It's like
Mhm.
finding the value, like really communicating the value was so important to me. And when I realized I couldn't fully communicate the value, I couldn't sell. I couldn't
Yeah.
sell anything until I could, like you said, ethically say these are the outcomes that I can at least forecast for you that are possible versus here's just a list of things you can do and fix.
And there's still some clients that are going to go for the convincing snake oil salesman for sure. Like that's just going to, those kinds of clients I tell people all the time, like you didn't want that client anyway, because if that's the kind of sales pitch they wanted and it isn't this kind of sales pitch you provide, then that client wants a different experience than what you're going to provide. Because you don't provide that kind of sales pitch. They want that kind of sales pitch. They want that kind of experience where it's like all Mad Men and everything else. And if you're not providing that, then don't pretend that you're going to provide that in your pitch. And the
Right.
same thing too with there are agencies out there who do that. And those kinds of clients can go to those agencies. And that's also a perfectly valid way to run your business.
Mhm.
But that's not what you do. Don't try to force yourself to be that because there are clients who just want more chill, honest advice from someone who's a solo practitioner or a small agency and is not necessarily flashy, but just heads down, gets results. There's lots of people like that out there in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great to hear. So I didn't realize I know you as like a analytics guru, but can you tell me about your agency? Because I didn't realize that you built websites and all the things that you've been mentioning. So please tell me all about your business.
It's so funny because I reinvented myself with regards to my focus in the industry starting around 2017, which is how I got into analytics. But back to the beginning. So early on, I have a degree in geography, which I do not use, obviously. And I was working in software, which is not a career one takes after geography. And then I got laid off and I used my layoff money to teach myself how to make websites. And I've been tinkering with websites on the side, but I actually said, there's my 6-month severance. It was very generous. I'm going to take this time to really learn how to make websites properly using Dreamweaver, which is what you used in 2000. And there wasn't even analytics yet. Google Analytics didn't exist. Google AdWords didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. There was no local. There was just like the 10 blue links that does not exist anymore. And that's what I did for 6 months. And then I got my first client. And my very first client, after I launched her website, said to me, okay, how do I get on Google? And I said, I do not know. I will get back to you. And then I found Rand Fishkin's blog. And he was one of the first people I met in the field. Actually, I met him in person at SES Toronto 2004, which is not a conference that exists anymore. And Jill Whalen, who's also left the field, I won that ticket to SES Toronto from her. She was a copywriting person who I also got to know early on in SEO. And so it turns out I was way better at SEO than I was at building websites personally. We have a team who builds websites. I'm not involved. I'm not very good at it. But back then it was like you didn't have to, it wasn't as hard as it is now, for sure. The complexity of websites has obviously grown exponentially since I was making little flat files in Dreamweaver. And then I focused entirely on SEO. So I had an agency in Hamilton, which I then sold when my now wife and I moved to Edmonton, freelancing for a while. And then I started Kickpoint with my business partner, Jen, in 2012. And so at Kickpoint, we started just doing SEO, but then eventually brought on designers, developers. And so now we do SEO, PPC, building websites, content, the whole shebang. We have a team of 17. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And so a couple of years ago, actually more than a couple of years ago, time has lost all meaning with COVID. But in 2020, which was more than a couple of years ago, LinkedIn Learning approached me about doing a course on their platform, technical SEO. Yeah, absolutely. Because I love teaching. I was starting to do some workshops a little bit. And I started to push more into analytics, but I was still like half and half SEO and analytics. And so I did a technical SEO course. Then I did a course on transitioning from Universal Analytics to GA4, advanced GA4, and then another course on building websites. And then from that experience, we decided to launch Kickpoint Playbook, which is the learning companion site, which is what you have the stickers for at Brighton SEO. And so we have 2 courses on there. We have Analytics for Agencies and Practical GA4. And we have more courses coming out later this year and next year. And that learning platform has been really interesting. And I think it's interesting that's what people are starting to get to know me for, like their first introduction to me, because this was like part of the brand was how are we going to shift from me being known as Kickpoint to me being known as like part of the playbook, but still have the agency stuff going on. So that's been an interesting challenge for the organization. But I think the team that built the Playbook site and like the people that I work with on Playbook are so good. And yeah, I'm just really proud of the work that we've done there. And we have lots of people taking our courses. And part of what makes the courses good, in my opinion, is that I have regular communication with people taking the courses. You get access to a community when you buy the course, and there's office hours for Analytics for Agencies. And then I can get the questions that they get, which often turns into pieces of content that we publish or new lessons or new courses, which has also been a really valuable thing as well, because then I can find out what people are really struggling with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super smart. I think your transition and rebranding or co-branding, I don't know exactly how you'd call that, but speaking is obviously a great way to do that because that's how I found you.
Yeah, I've been speaking since my first speaking engagement was SMX West 2012. And that's actually where I met a whole bunch of people I'm still good friends with now, my conference friends. I got that conference because Matt McGee was running that particular panels on local SEO, which is what I was doing a lot of at the time. And he had blog posts on his website on how to pitch a conference. And so I was like, I want to speak at this conference. I'm living out west. I can go to SMX West. It won't cost me $1 billion. And I read through how to pitch and I pitched it and it was like super detailed and I got in. I was very stoked. But that opened so many doors, that panel, because someone from Moz was in the audience. Then they asked me to do a webinar with them. And then they asked me to speak at MozCon. And then MozCon opened doors. So that's where that came from. And back when I was working in software, I did software training. That was my main thing. So I'd fly all over the States and train people on how to use customer relationship management software, which no one is stoked to ever use. So that's part of where the humor comes in is no one is ever excited, especially salespeople, to sit down and use software, right? It's not what they want to do. More than once I'd show up somewhere and they'd be like, oh, it was a nice day today. So the salespeople went golfing. So maybe you can just sit down with the IT people and talk to them about it. Like, all right, cool. One time the clients, it's a nice day. Let's go to a Cubs game. Okay. You don't want to learn about the thing that I've flown all the way out here to teach you? Of course I'll go to the Cubs game, but it's just like people do literally anything other than learn CRM software. And so I feel like a lot of that expertise lends itself to GA4 because people will do literally anything other than learn GA4.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm a lifelong learner. I love to learn things. And I have, honestly, as I was preparing for this, I was talking to myself about my attitude. I was like, you've got to change your attitude because if you want people to learn about SEO, you've got to figure out a way to get excited about this. So I did. But I am afraid a little bit that my questions might be a little elementary or they may not be the right questions, but I feel like you're the best person to ask.
There's something you forget after you've been doing this for a while. Everybody's entering the industry at this moment. There's always someone new coming in and there's always someone who's leaving. And so I think it's important to not be like, oh, everyone should know this by now, because definitely not everyone knows this by now.
Yeah.
And there's still things in GA4 too. Even though I am an expert at GA4, there's still things I'm like, oh, really? That's a setting or this is a thing that's going on, because it's such a complex piece of software with lots of moving parts and lots of changes happening all the time. No one person can know absolutely everything.
Okay. And I'm glad you said that because even for my small group, I always try to say, hey, how can we get to where we're trying to get to the fastest? Yeah, we don't have to know everything about everything. We just need to know the most important pieces. So like just from an overview perspective, why is it important like for an entrepreneur or small business to have some GA4 knowledge or implementation in their business?
Yeah, I think it's really critical because otherwise you're not going to know how your marketing efforts are going. And I think that's a really fundamental thing is you're spending money on either ads or you've spent money as an effort on SEO. You've spent resources in some way to market yourself. You want to know how those ways are paying off. And I think it is difficult to just open up GA4 and go in there and be like, oh, yes, this is making money. GA4 has a lot more options than it used to with Universal Analytics. You get more events out of the gate. It tracks some form fills, not necessarily well, but it tracks something. It'll track video plays of YouTube videos because there's no other video platform other than YouTube, right? It tracks scroll depth, right? It tracks like file downloads and external links, all things we would have had to set up separately in Universal Analytics. So I'm happy that it tracks that stuff by default, but it also requires a bit of preparation time. What is a key event? If I want to look at this extra piece of data that I'm looking at in GA4, it's not available everywhere. I have to register it as custom dimension or custom metric. You got to do that in advance because it's not going to backdate. You want to create an audience of people you want to remarket to in ads. You got to create that audience right away because it's not going to backdate, right? So there's lots of things that you need to do planning wise early on that I think that if you're just getting into GA4, you're like, crap, I haven't done this. Can I do anything about it? The best time to set up would have been at the beginning, but the next best time is right now. So don't feel like you're like, oh, that ship has sailed. I can't go in and change things, because you can certainly constantly be making it better. There's no one gold standard of how to do things. There's certainly rules about GA4 that are important to follow, but what you track and what's important to you is going to be unique to you and your business and how you do things. So if you don't sell stuff online, do you need those monetization reports? Nope, just remove them from the navigation. You don't need revenue in every single report because you don't have revenue online. People fill out a form, they go with you or they don't go with you. Are there ways that you can push that revenue data back into GA4 once someone signs up with you? Yeah, for sure. Is that accessible for many small businesses? No, absolutely not. And so it's a matter of thinking about, these are what's possible, but also what's the scale of my implementation according to the scale of my business.
Yeah.
And I think that's where GA4 really is a struggle, because it is more built for analysts than normal human beings, unfortunately.
I actually feel really good about that. That makes me feel really good about myself as just a normal human being.
Honestly, it is a huge improvement over universal analytics in terms of how it captures data. The way the data model works in GA4 is significantly better. There's been some really smart choices made on how things like engaged sessions, huge, massive improvement. Like bounce rate on universal analytics was total BS. No one should have put any stock in it at all. It was never measuring what you thought it was measuring. Engagement rate in GA4 is better because it measures by default if someone has kept the active tab as their open tab for at least 10 seconds, they've gone to a second page, or they've converted. Those are all engaged things. So you can tell the quality of your traffic by the percentage of engaged sessions that come in from that channel. That report alone is a really useful thing to look at. But then once you start to get deeper into it, you're like, this percentage of sessions was this 67% engaged and this was 80% engaged. That's a pretty clear thing. But this is 68%, this is 67%. That 1% is meaningless. You're really looking again at directional trends. What are the big swings that are happening? And we've seen this too with like where people buy ads, say on third-party websites, and then the engagement rate from those ad clicks is like 20%. It's just bots coming to your website. You should shut up those ads, right? That's one of the things where engaged sessions really shines.
And that was one of my questions, let's say like through a Shopify traffic report, and it's impacting like the conversion rate of all these visitors that don't seem to be actual visitors. And I installed Microsoft Clarity and it was excluding.
Which is a great product and not used enough.
Okay, awesome. I had Celeste Gonzalez on a few weeks ago and she came and gave us the lesson. Yeah. But it showed like an exclusion of traffic. And I was like, this is great. I'm looking for this. Like, how do I get that data? Because I felt like my data was dirty. Like there wasn't an accurate representation of the actual people who were coming and the actual people that were converting. I wanted to know that number. It's like, how do you clean your data?
And the thing is, you're never going to actually know that number. It's never going to be a number. And this is where, again, like that post I shared with you, one of the things we're really trying to do is de-emphasize the actual numbers and instead focus on percentage relative to each other. So let's say, for example, you're looking at like sessions and key events by landing page. And you know that one landing page gets 26% of the sessions overall and 5% of the key events. Hey, you know what? That page might be, we can do a better job of converting it. But if I say that this landing page got 1,500 sessions and 8 key events, are you like, is that good or bad? But if I tell you those percentages where it's 26% of the sessions and 5% of the key events, that's much, much clearer. Basically, I call it punching above and below your weight. And so I think that's where changing the types of reports you provide to think about it in those percentages, which you can't actually do, unfortunately, within GA4. You have to use a tool like Looker Studio to provide that kind of information. But I think that especially when you're talking to like clients is a much better way to present that data because it de-emphasizes the actual numbers and instead emphasizes the directionality of the data. Does this page do better or worse than this? Is organic traffic increasing or decreasing, right? If people watch this video, does it help them buy something? Those are the kinds of things where you don't need to know the number of people. You just need to know the percentages. That's where if you focus on the percentages over the actual values, you can make much better decisions because then you're not over focusing on the actual numbers and losing your way in the, this says I had 10 sales, but I have 20 in Shopify. What's going on? Ad blockers, probably. You can't do much about that unless you want to get into an expensive world of server-side tracking. So instead, let's focus on the data that we do have and parsing that.
So that brings up another question of, say, Apple, when they implemented those privacy changes, how did that impact the data that is picked up by something like Google Analytics?
So what happens in Safari and also Firefox as well is the technology called ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention. And so every 7 days, any third-party tracking cookies, and sometimes after 1 day in some cases, but most of the time it's 7 days, your cookies are cleared. So I come to your website today, and then let's say I'm using Safari, and I come back to your website 10 days later, I'm going to look like a brand new person in GA as far as that is concerned, because my cookies are gone. So your GA4 account has no idea that I was on the site before because there's no cookies to show that evidence because this cookie has been wiped. The number of new users is going to look significantly higher for Safari visitors potentially, depending upon how often they come to your website. And this is really only necessarily a problem, though, where you have people like coming to your website lots of times before they decide if they're going to go with you or not, which is may not, depending upon what you sell, may or may not be a problem. If you're selling t-shirts, people are going to decide or they're not. Right. If you're selling boats, yeah, there might be a few visits before they go ahead and do a purchase. And even for us, for example, like selling courses, people make lots of visits before they go ahead and purchase. And certainly there's some data that we can do. If you join our mailing list, I can save a cookie that's independent of the GA cookie, which sometimes will persist. And then I can actually know that you're you when you come back again later. Or if you come to our website via our email newsletter, then I know your subscriber ID and then I can tie that to your sessions as well. But like a lot, that requires advanced analytics setup. And a lot of that is not accessible to a lot of people. And a lot of people don't necessarily have those kinds of newsletter signups. Maybe people call you, especially small business clients. Most of the time it's the phone. And that is just, yeah, I know they called me, but that maybe they never went to my website. Maybe they've never been cookied. Maybe they called me directly from the Google business profile listing. So I can't do much with this person. It was a retargeting or remarketing.
Let me go back to that very beginning piece then. So regardless of what you call that, ITP?
ITP is what the technology is called.
Okay. Yeah. They still are cookied for 7 days.
At least, yeah.
Okay. That's good to know because I didn't realize that. And I fall in that category of people coming back to my site multiple times. Number one, because a lot of times they come when they're looking for ideas and I sell a fairly expensive product. So they don't usually pull the trigger right away. Sometimes they do, but I've had Shopify data. I don't know whether it's true or not, but this is what Shopify told me, that maybe they might come back like 7 or 8 times over a 21, 31 day period.
And those probably 7 or 8 times, they might be, if they come back every 6 days, then the cookie will refresh and start at 0 again. So then you'd be okay for another 7 days. It's not 7 days period. If I come to your website 6 days, now I'm at day 1 again.
Okay.
Your website technically 12 days after my first visit, but 6 days after my last one, the cookie resets to 1 again. But most of the time too, it's looking at your browsers and seeing what are people using when they access my website. If they're using mostly Chrome, you're probably okay in terms of first visit tracking. But if you're using Safari, just maybe don't look at that for multi-touch.
What about like creating a specific key event? Is that what I would need to do to be able to track those, say, Safari users?
Nope. Key events are just like events that you've promoted into being something we used to be called a conversion.
Okay.
So in that case, I would make a segment. Yeah, you can make a comparison now, a saved comparison. And so make a comparison of Safari users and of Chrome users and just see if the relative percentage of Safari users who are first visitors and Chrome users who are first visitors, because first visit is an event that is captured in GA4. So just see if you have a lot more proportionally first visits with Safari, and then you would know if that ITP issue is causing problems or not.
What if people visited your site and then you wanted to retarget them with ads? What's that
So
called?
any retargeting cookie, if you're using Google Ads, for example, that's a first party cookie. So you can do that. But something to keep in mind is if you are targeting people in Europe, there are privacy, and California as well has some consent management stuff going on. So it's where you probably will need some sort of consent management product. And not being a privacy expert, I'm not going to speak too deeply on ins and outs of that. If you're not sending any consent signals at all, which some people do, it just means that people aren't going to show up in your remarketing audiences if they're located in the European economic area. They just won't exist. So you could see a difference in size between your audience in GA4 and your audience in Google Ads. There's other reasons why the audience would differ, but that's a major. But besides consent, if someone comes on your website and you've built an audience in GA4, you want to use that audience for remarketing in Google Ads, then that's how that's built. And it's through the Google GA4 first party cookie. But if you're using like a third party advertising network, like Taboola or like those kinds of third party tools, they track you across different websites and they may not be able to track you as well as they used to on Safari. Now we know that Google has said, we're not going to get rid of third-party cookies at all anymore. Yeah, we were joking, lol. Honestly, the way it was going so badly, I wondered if they were going to get rid of saying that. People were very excited when they said, oh, they're going to keep third-party cookies, but it still doesn't change the fact that third-party cookies have been gone from Safari for years now. So you're already missing out on that audience if you rely on third-party cookies, but cookies like GA4, Google Ads, they are first-party cookies. And so if you're remarketing to people who have been on your website and did or didn't do certain things, or just generally have been on your website, that's fine. That isn't necessarily impacted by that.
I didn't realize that about Safari, but was that like back when the whole Facebook issue happened?
Yeah, it was when
Okay.
Facebook was freaking
It
out
was
too, same
impacted.
idea. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that makes sense now. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, I've said this for a long time, when they build a website, I think SEO is built in. And
Mhm.
I now feel their pain because I thought once you're using Google that these audiences were built in. And so, oh my gosh, I got to go back and that's my number one thing that I've already taken away from today. I do an episode called Follow Through Fridays after I
Mhm.
interview an expert. And that is
Yep.
the first thing I'm going to do is set up those audiences because I thought that was an automatic thing.
Oh, yeah, so a good audience to set up would be people who have converted, and so anyone who's had a key event. Another good audience would be people who've never people who, for example, like, looked at a really critical page, looked at your the product page, but never actually had a purchase event, for example. That's a good remarketing audience, and I think exclusions are just as important as inclusions when it comes to any audience you're gonna use for remarketing, 'cause you don't wanna waste money on people who've already bought the thing. For example, on Kickpoint Playbook, if you come check out our course page, you add it to your cart, we don't see a purchase event. That doesn't necessarily mean you didn't purchase on another device. Totally possible that you did. So one of our exclusions is that you actually saw the behind the login pages, and then we would exclude you from the audience. But you could still be on your phone, and maybe you only use your desktop to access courses. And on your phone, you just read blog posts, and you could see a remarketing audience on your phone. And so there's not much I can do about that. So many ways I can try to exclude people out of here.
Yeah.
And not being an ads expert, there's like extra stuff you can do with email addresses and everything, but that requires you to like opt into Google tracking you by your email address, which necessarily everybody does. So it's just exclusions aren't perfect, but even though they're not perfect, you should still set them up for sure.
Yeah. And I feel like with Shopify and GA4, I may be wrong, but it felt like they set up some pre-existing events and maybe some stuff came over from Universal Analytics that I'd signed up for a long time ago. But one of the things I thought GA4 was cool because it would show you like
Mhm.
these are the touch points that your user
Yep.
has taken or and
Oh,
this is
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that is valuable data, and it's based on the people engaging with you. And one of the things that Shopify does well is, and we have a few clients using Shopify as well, and they do set up events really well for e-commerce. For a long time, Shopify didn't add GA4 until way too late in the process. And yeah, that was like it's just time's a ticking, guys. You got to add GA4 on here. This is wild. So we had some sort of hybrid implementations where we're using Google Tag Manager to push GA4 into a Shopify website until they got their poop in a group to fix that up. But they finally got there. It's great. Do I have a full year of comparison data for some people? Barely, but it's better than nothing. Yeah, I would find that with Shopify, they did implement the GA4 e-commerce data layer. And that's another thing actually that's great about GA4 is that the e-commerce implementation is also significantly better than it was in Universal Analytics. It was bolted on in Universal Analytics after the fact. And if listeners aren't familiar with the history of Universal Analytics and how we got here, if you don't mind, I can go into it a little bit.
Please, let's go.
Universal Analytics, it was originally called Urchin Analytics, which is why the code starts with UA dash. And then Google bought Urchin in 2004. And that's why it's a UTM parameter because it was Urchin Tracking Module was the name of that parameter. So that's a fun fact
Oh,
you can tell at parties.
yeah. I
Yeah.
always thought it was something with
Mhm.
Universal or something like that. I never knew what it
And I
was.
think that's what they called it Universal Analytics because originally it was just Google Analytics. And then when they made the switch to how the tracking code worked, which was about 2009, I think, then they called the original Classic Analytics, and then they switched to Universal Analytics. And so really GA as a tool broke when we got tabs because so much of how GA worked was that it was following you from page to page, but now you could open something in a new tab. Now you could keep tabs open for weeks. And a lot of those things really broke how UA worked. So one common example I would tell people is let's say you had a tab open on your browser for months, which people do all the time. And in Universal Analytics, every time your browser would become active again, it would send a 0-second page view off to Universal Analytics. And so you would have these sessions that would show up and it would look like a real page view. But if you looked at the duration of the page, it would be 0 seconds. And that would even happen if I was on my phone and I have an Android device, I'm looking at the Chrome tab list and I just scroll past it. It would also send a 0-second page view in some cases. Even though I didn't engage with the tab in any way, it just flashed by as I scroll through my list of tabs. Doesn't matter.
Like an
And
impression.
so one of the things that GA4 does is it doesn't have that problem anymore. So now the tab hoarders, you'll still see it show up. But again, normally a tab hoarder problem, and this is what the not set issue in GA4 comes from. So let's say you're like halfway through my blog post, you go and have lunch, and then you come back again, you start scrolling. I'm tracking 25%, 50, 75%, 100% scroll depth, as well as every image that you view. So let's say you view an image, but you haven't reloaded the page. You haven't started a session as far as GA4 is concerned. So there's no landing page, so it shows up as not set. There's no source medium because the session didn't start. It shows up as not set. It's just this random event that's not attached to a session at all. And so that's where not set was coming from, is those sessions sort of started after a timeout happened, but you didn't close the tab or, reload it in any way when you came back to restart your session. Apparently now, I think, was it Friday? Last Friday? GA4 just casually mentioned, hey, we're doing this thing to fix not set. I don't know if it's going to work or not. We'll see. But they are trying to solve that problem. So that's nice because it shouldn't be not set. I get what the problem is. The problem is they have an event that didn't have a session start event before it. So they have no session to attach it to. But you should still be able to pull something from the cookie to realize that someone has timed out and they're starting again. That's what GA4 is doing. But that's why you would see not set data show up in your session, your traffic acquisition, but you wouldn't see it in your user acquisition report. So it's the first way people got to the website. But your session, your traffic acquisition report is how people got to the site in that particular session. And a lot of times it would be that they just left a tab open and then came back to it later.
So what about the direct? I'd heard that people when they type in your domain, but then I also heard that it's like when they can't figure out what it is.
Yes.
So is that true?
Yeah, that's totally true. So when GA4 is making a guess on where people came from, they're looking at something called the referrer of the page. So if you say Google something, you click on a Google result, you go to the website, Google will say in the refer that it's google.com. Now they could say the entire URL. They could say it's google.com/your search, but they don't include that anymore because it's up to the originating website to decide what refer information they're going to push to the destination website. So some social networks, for example, Mastodon, which people were using for a hot minute, they don't include any refer information in links at all. So that would show up as direct because Mastodon has made the active choice to exclude that refer information. If you click on a link from an app and that link was not UTM'd, it's very likely it's going to show up as direct because there is no refer website because it's a link from an app. There's no URL to show up as the refer. So that's where those things, direct traffic, come in. So direct traffic is also if somebody clicked on a link from, this used to be more of a problem when we switched originally, we had a lot more non-secure websites before HTTPS was really forced on all websites. But originally it would be if you clicked on a link on an insecure website and went to a secure website, the refer information would also be stripped and it would also show up as direct. So there's lots of reasons why direct traffic. And it could also be that someone has had your website open for so long that it's outside the 90-day acquisition window. And so because that 90 days is up now, they don't know how you got there because your 90 days of where you originally got to the site is just like, you've had this tab open for 6 months. You come back to it 6 months later, your 90-day acquisition window has timed out. Now you're showing up as direct. Totally possible as well.
It cracks me up because sometimes I describe like just SEO in general, like you have your house and all of a sudden people are coming through windows and it's like, how the crap did you get in here?
Or someone's in your living room and you're like, oh, I've just been sleeping here for 6 months. You didn't know?
Exactly.
And GA4 is just making a guess on where traffic goes based on that refer. So going back to the Google example, if you Google something, you click on a website to go there, GA4 will look at I don't see a G-click ID in the URL and there's no UTM parameters. So it must be organic. But if somebody then Googles something, clicks in an ad, then Google will see it's from google.com and GA4 will see it's from google.com and they will see that there's a G-click ID because that's that ID that comes along with the Google ad. And they'll say, oh, it must be paid. Great. Or you include a UTM. And if there's a UTM, then Google will say, I'm going to ignore everything it says from the refer. Doesn't matter at all. I'm only going to go off of what's in the UTM. And so that's really and that's how you can do things if you have Google My Business traffic. Why UTMing your links is really important because otherwise they'll just show up as organic traffic unless you add UTMs to it to show that it's specifically from Google Business Profiles is what it's called.
Where do you add UTM parameters for Google Business Profile?
In the website link.
Oh, okay. Gosh, and is all of that a manual process?
Yeah, it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's important But then you can also, if you've added UTM parameters to your website link on your Google Business Profile, then you can also look in Search Console and see how often your Google Business Profile shows up because those UTMs will come up in the landing page that's shown to you in Google Search Console. So it's important for a couple different reasons.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I've gotten a lot of referral traffic from Pinterest and I can totally see where all of these discrepancies are happening because I'm close to my people. I talk to them, so I know exactly where they come from. So when I get the little report of like from Shopify that says this is where they came from, I'm like, no, that's not, or at least that, or they remember.
But they're just going off of what the refer is. So if the refer is Pinterest, like you could have put all these UTMs on a link, But then somebody would strip them, for example, because they know marketing. They're like, I'm not going to include these UTMs. I'm just going to send it to my friend. And like the example I have in the blog post is I was booking a pest control service for our house. We live in an area of the world where you have to spray for ants every year or they take over. And so we need a new pest control company. And so I Googled a bunch of options. I clicked on the website link. They had UTMs on their website link in Google Business Profile. It's great. But then I took the link without the UTMs and texted it to my wife so that she could book it because she was going to be home when they were going to come here and I was not. And she clicked on the link from the text message and then booked the service. So when I sent that to her in a text message, it showed up as direct because I didn't include UTMs with that link. And because there's no refer website, it's a link from a text message or from Slack or from a Facebook Messenger or whatever it might be. If there's no UTMs, Google has no idea where this person is coming from.
So how does that impact like overall marketing then? Because I've heard there's this battle in larger companies about who gets the attribution. What does that mean?
Yeah, there's certainly things you can do. If it's a huge enough portion of your traffic, you can try to recapture it with Google Discover, for example. The way it shows up is like a special weird com.android URL thing, and you can grab that and do something with it. But again, like if you're not getting enough of that traffic, doesn't make it worthwhile. In a big company, it's probably worthwhile to put those extra checks in. And there might be some stuff that you can maybe sniff behind the scenes. How did they get here? But the reality is like a lot of the time, you don't actually know unless it's a specific landing page that you know that you only shared on this one channel. And then maybe, let's say you got a QR code and the QR code goes to a specific landing page. That page is not indexed on Google, but you forgot to add UTMs to your QR code. So you would know the people who came to this page are from wherever you shared the QR code. There's no UTM, so they're going to show up as direct in GA4. You would just know that that's originally where they came from. If you added UTMs to that URL for the QR code, then yeah, you would have them in the correct channel and everything else in GA4. But it's just like one simple thing that you forgot to do. And then all of a sudden, everything's showing up as direct.
Wow. Okay. I know we have to close this down. I have to follow up with that just real quick because the QR code then is, say you had a product that you wanted to advertise or that you just wanted to have a post. You either got to start with a UTM code attached to that post, or you have to have separate landing pages for it. And if you had separate landing pages for it, is that then duplicate content?
So one of the other things you can do as well, and actually there's a free course I have on Bright Local about GA4 and actually go through this process in that course if people are interested in checking that out. Just Google GA4 Essentials Bright Local, it'll come up for you. But one of the things I talk about is one of the things we add is often redirects. So we'll have a URL that's like yoursite.com/ant removal service, for example. And then when you put out a flyer, you have the URL of yoursite.com/ant removal service. And then when people visit that URL, you then redirect your ant removal service page with UTM parameters appended, because you know the only people who came to the ant removal service URL are people who saw that URL in your flyer. So that is another way to do that as well. And I go through exactly how to do that in WordPress. But there's lots of different, like Wix has redirect, Shopify has redirect. So any redirect tool, just put in what your URL that you're going to publish out in the world is, and then you would redirect that to your actual URL with the UTM parameters appended, which is a nice way to get multiple sort of vanity URLs out there in the world, but not need to worry about people like typing in UTM parameters because literally no one's ever going to do that.
Yeah, that is so genius. And it's so applicable to e-commerce because a lot of times like this is great for blog sites or service sites. Some of the best advice I've ever heard to do that for e-commerce because I was trying to figure out how do you do that with product pages.
Yeah. And same thing with QR codes too. Make sure you're always UTMing those URLs from QR codes because maybe they'll remove the UTMs later, but at least you got them when you first come to the website. And it's less obvious that there are UTM codes on a mobile browser, which is how people are using QR codes anyway. So they wouldn't necessarily realize the UTMs are there, and hopefully we'll just pass on the URL to a friend with the UTMs appended.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my own behavior, and I've done that before. Okay. Where can people learn more about these courses, and specifically like an entrepreneur, like the My Small Group entrepreneur group? What would be the most beneficial type of product that you have for them? Could we start with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the website is kpplaybook.com or Google Kickpoint Playbook or Google me, Dana DiTomaso. There's many different ways you can spell my last name. Most of them will get to me. There's only one other Dana DiTomaso in the world. She's in Pueblo if you want to swing by and say hi. But the course for entrepreneurs, I would say the best one is Practical GA4, which is focused strictly on GA4. I assume in this course that you don't have Tag Manager or any other advanced stuff running. You're just using GA4. And so it goes through GA4 from start to finish. But I also have this whole how-to section on how to do common use cases. Like, I want to know how many people click on this specific button. I show you how to do that just with GA4, no GTM. So I think that's really accessible for people who are like, I just need to know analytics. I don't need to worry about all this other nerd stuff. I don't want to learn JavaScript. I don't want to get into the coding of it. Then Practical GA4 is the course for you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I think most people, and myself included, we're using CMSs like Shopify or Wix. And so that coding, we pass that off and we're hoping just to come in and do our things.
Yeah. Yeah. And for that course too, I'll give you a 20% off code that you can include in the show notes as well.
Dana, I appreciate that.
You
Awesome
bet.
sauce. Okay, guys, I know today this was a big one, but I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Remember, you can drop me a text message. The link to send me a text is in the show notes. And then you can also search the show. If you heard something that you love, just go click that search the show link and then search whatever term you heard today and it will pop right up there for you just to learn more. Dana, thank you again for being here with us. And I hope to see you in November in San Diego.
Yeah, you will. I'm doing a full day workshop on Google Looker Studio and reporting. And then I'm going to be giving a session as well.
I should probably be at that workshop. Yeah, I should probably be there. But thanks for being on the show. And guys, I will catch you next week.